Welcome back. Well, every week I try to catch up with a lawmaker outside the Capitol who's making waves in the regular legislative session for a casual chat. Let's head out to the Capitol steps. I'm joined by State Representative Charles Owen. He is a Republican from Leesville.
Live in Leesville, yes, sir.
Okay. And you recently issued a report and you presented it to the Committee on Homeland Security. That report has been adopted and it's in the record. This is a report on the state's reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic. Just sort of detail for us what sort of topics you covered in the report.
Well, I think it's more germane to tell you why we did the report. When we first got started here, when I first got started here in 2020, we lost a legislator. Reggie Bagala died. And the guy who replaced him, Joe Orgeron, was elected a few months later. And I called Joe to welcome him to the House. And we were talking about the moment we were in, the pandemonium of the pandemic. And Joe and I both agreed someday we need to look back at what the state did and to figure out what we did right and wrong, because none of us were alive in 1918, last time there was a pandemic. So enough time had passed, and last year we adopted a resolution in the House Resolution 133, to do just this, to look at what the state did and to figure out what we did right and what we did wrong, and to come up with pathways for success. The House voted for it unanimously. We did not send it to the Senate. It was not a concurrent resolution. The House just wanted to do this because it was our choice. We put the report in 4 different bins: health and hospitals, education systems, business, and the actions of the executive branch. And we touched a little bit on the legislative branch. But those were the 4 bins we decided to proceed in.
Yeah, and people can read the report, but I wanted to drill down on the business reaction to how the state handled the pandemic. How did businesses react?
Most businesses, I would say, responded to what the state told them they needed to do early. We were all put in shock. I'm not a business owner. Businesses reacted early when the shutdowns were ordered, but then they started pushing back when the shutdowns continued, and when the administration kind of weaponized government to make sure that they were staying closed. There's a line in the report that the previous administration actually weaponized the fire marshal's office to go and make sure businesses were closed. That's not the fire marshal's duty. So there were businesses that were not happy about it. I would say by and large it was about probably 40-60 feedback that we got from businesses. Now look, what we did was we pulsed Louisiana Association of Business and Industry and the National Federation of Independent Businesses for the data we used on that. We wanted to hold hearings for that section. We ran out of time. So we pulsed Lobby and NFIB. Lobby responded, and they got word back from about 100 different business owners across the state.
Mm-hmm. Also, during the committee meeting where you presented your report, I remembered you saying that something to the effect that individual rights were sort of ignored during that time. Can you sort of expand on that?
Well, yeah. We told people that they had to stay at home. We insinuated and kind of pushed down on the issue of students having, like for example, students having to get vaccines to go to school, when in fact we really should not have done that. I say we, meaning the state of Louisiana. When the COVID vaccines first came out, they were under what was known as emergency use authorization. A lot of people I'd never heard of that. Emergency use authorization basically is we've got a drug here. It's not been fully tested. It's still considered experimental use. Citizens were supposed to have been told every time you got a COVID shot, this is an experimental drug. I don't know anyone who was told that. So that really bothered me. And then trying to enforce mask mandates when they walked into businesses or into government offices. And there was no data that masks would help alleviate that thing. In fact, what I found out in the years since COVID, what we found out in the years since COVID, is that masks were actually under emergency use authorization because that was a procedure the government said we're going to adopt, and it had never been tested. So a lot of things like that went on. The government, I think, early on was trying to protect people, but they they just kept going with what they were doing as opposed to allowing the state to move on.
Yeah, this is obviously a very large report, and I've read some of it, but would you encourage just the general public to take a look at it as well?
I would, and I say that because we had 2 days of hearings in September, and we invited a lot of people. Some people came from out of state, but the most impactful testimony we got were from Louisianians, specifically from physicians who were pushed around by large hospitals, by small hospitals, that they were kind of pushed around as to how they were going to practice. The large hospitals and LDH, and to a degree the State Board of Medical Licensing and Examining, the State Board of Licensing got in the middle and told doctors how to practice. They were discouraging them for doing things that were outside of the approved government solution to treating COVID. They stepped in the middle. The Louisiana Department of Health at the time stepped in the middle of the doctor-patient relationship as far as dispensing medications. You know, there were approved medications that the federal government was pushing, which forced the state to push. Now, the actions of the state were mostly driven by the actions of the federal government, which precipitated actions at hospitals. So there was a cascading effect of bad decisions that came from Washington and that were implemented here. But for example, them telling a physician, a licensed MD, that you should not be dispensing an off-label drug, even though it's approved for humans, was a step way too far for most of us.
Mm-hmm. Well, we know it's a public document. We know that you want people to share it and read it as well. We'll do our best to make it available to our viewers. So I just want to thank you so much for taking time to talk to us.
Well, thank you very much, too. Appreciate it.
By the way, that report does have suggestions as well for future pandemics. And Representative Owen gave me that report. I've put a copy on our website. It's LouisianaFirstNews.com. Go read it for yourself. President Trump pardons a Baton Rouge rapper. Up next, you'll hear his reaction. Stay with us.